Thanks, Pat. Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to our 15th anniversary of the National Distance Learning Week Conference. We are now kicking off day 3 with an amazing speaker, Dr. Alexandra Salas. But before I introduce her, please allow me to thank our sponsors, beginning with our gold sponsors. Many thanks, D2L, Instructure, Logitech, NC Sarah Poly, Tennessee State, TDU, Verizon, and JDL Horizons, who's providing this live broadcast in English and Spanish for us. Many thanks also to our silver sponsors, EDU Alliance, Harmonize, IntelliBoard, Information Age Publishing, Nearpod, Yamaha, Yellow Dig, and to our bronze sponsors, Anatomage, Arizona Telemedicine Program, Southwest Telehealth Resource Center, Enrollment Resources, Virtual Advisor, Proctorio, Video 360, Viopta, Virtual Care, and Xanadu. Many thanks also to our USDLA friends. We're very grateful to all of you for your contributions to making this conference possible. If you are not already a USDLA member, we extend a warm invitation for you to join us as a member. And also, if you would like to get involved in leading our organization, please contact any one of us about serving on the USDLA Board of Directors. Our next national conference is July 17th through 20th in Orlando, Florida. Please mark your calendars. We would love to invite you to submit proposals and to join us in Orlando. We have webinars just about every Friday. We have different forums. We have an active LinkedIn group, and we also have Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram presence. So please get involved to your heart's content. We always appreciate your interest and your collaboration. Thank you for joining in our efforts. So today we will hear from Dr. Alexandra Salas, who will talk about her research with stewardship and the future of instructional delivery. But before we get started, please allow me to introduce our speaker. Dr. Alexandra Salas is Dean of Innovation, Teaching and Digital Learning Excellence and Educational Support Services at Delaware County Community College. Her background includes work as a dissertation editor and coach, an education consultant, speaker, and facilitator. She also has extensive post-secondary teaching experience in traditional and online platforms. Higher education focus areas for Alex include leadership, systems thinking, student success, globalization, technology, and innovation. Her book, Numbers and Sense, Ensuring Student Success One Cohort at a Time, was published in April 2021 with Rome and Littlefield. Her upcoming title, About Leadership Exodus, features interviews with higher ed presidents and professionals about agency and change during post-COVID. So without further ado, let's send a warm welcome to Dr. Salas. Alex, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. Well, just give me a moment to bring up the presentation. And please, Gio, if you could tell me do you see the title slide?
Swap screens, please. Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Okay, good. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I was showing you the correct thing. So thank you very much. I'm privileged to be here. It's an honor to speak with you this afternoon on some conversations that I had with leadership during the pandemic time. So this session shares challenges and a focus on self-care and belonging, lessons learned, and possibilities for higher education that was curated during the summer and the fall of 2021 and the spring of 2022. For research and one-on-one conversations with college presidents and other higher education professionals. Some of the states represented are New Jersey, Georgia, New Mexico, Illinois, New York, Washington, D.C., Nevada, Tennessee, California, and Pennsylvania. Switching slides. Okay. I hope you see the introduction slide. There's a slight delay. So 22 higher education leaders made time to share insights on the curiosities driving this book. The discussions invited leaders to discuss higher ed ecosystem and strategies and tools to support this dynamic interconnected system that we have in higher ed. The themes that reappeared from every discussion, and I also see it in the literature, that I check into every day, focused again, as I mentioned earlier, on self-care, belonging, mindfulness, and some of the lessons learned and possibilities imagined and yet to be imagined for higher ed. The key questions asked centered on their specific professional experiences during this time and the challenges faced. Questions asked the what, the how, the why behind decisions made, and invited these leaders to guesstimate or approximate the future, particularly based on the resources that they have. A recent article published in the Harvard Business Review newsletter entitled "Today's Leaders Need Vulnerability, Not Bravado," resonated with me, and it's one of the inspirations. I think that as an educator and also as a writer and a researcher, it never ends, and so every time you come across new information, new conversations, you just want to keep adding to what inspired you to start asking those questions in the first place. And the authors noted and concurred with the interviewees that I had, the interviews that I had, closing thoughts about the future. And so I'm just going to quote a little piece, a paragraph from the article. "In a complex and uncertain world that demands consistent learning and agility, the most apt and adaptable leaders are those who are aware of their limitations and have the necessary humility to grow their own and others' potential, and are courageous and curious enough to create sincere and open connections with others. They build inclusive climate and psychological safety that foster constructive criticism and dissent. Above all, they embrace truth." And I can certainly say that those 22 interviews that I conducted pretty much resonated and echoed a lot of what I just read to you, mainly having agility, flexibility, versatility in our ability to connect and respond to issues, and our receptivity to technology and the unknown. So as I mentioned, I talked to 22 individuals. They were senior leadership, also included academic search firms, educators from 2-year, 4-year public and private institutions. A sentiment that is echoed by many whom I met recognize that the relationships we build, how they are imagined, are important because it affects our understanding and willingness and openness to examine ideas, find solutions, and also help us to cultivate and learn, to debate, to innovate, to align and realign, and collaborate. And it also allows us to contribute to the sustaining critical systems that undergird higher education, the delivery of it, the operations, and also the future. So as we all know, as participants in higher education, it consists of many components that serve to support its mission and also to advance student success. Together, these separate communities of academic affairs and student affairs, info technology, institutional research, advancement, and the like make up this larger ecosystem representative of the institutions and contribute to advancing these sustainable futures. So beginning at the Office of the President, these functional areas compose the operations of the college and aim to support the strategic plan, which serves as a guiding document. And again, in speaking with these leaders, it came back down to basics. Some had strategic plans that were very elaborate and felt that they had to synthesize them. Some had plans which were were up like a paperweight. They hadn't been updated, or they felt that needed to be updated. And so, these individuals came from different places, had different experiences, but all wound up in the same wound up on the same conclusion, that the communication is very important, and having an understanding of how the ecosystem and the layers of higher education, and how it's important for these various areas to connect and communicate and work collaboratively in order to affect positive change. A recent article about leadership turnover reports on issues that cause these imbalances in higher education ecosystem. So for college presidents, stepping in after the exits of several leaders has meant trying to bring consistency and constancy to institutions that are in various states of flux. And I know that we're now hopefully post-pandemic, and that conversations of the pandemic sometimes are just, getting old for some people. But the reality is that we have to continue to keep those at center and top of mind in order to continue to learn from the lessons, and understand that while the urgency is not what it was 2 years ago, we can't relax, and we can't just go back to what was. So this could mean implementing strategic plans that have multiple starts and stops, and overseeing neglected hiring processes or correcting misaligned budgets. Coordination and collaboration among all functional areas are important as a holistic practice embraced by these leaders. Examples of these include creating intuitive and aligned master plans that set a path, a vision, and milestones, touchstones, and supports. These should possess a transparent framework for accountability. Can also include developing enrollment plans, academic master plans, information technology plans, and also consider non-credit and workforce development plans in the mix. Also, there should be a reminder that shared governance could and can mean shared visions. To follow are a couple of quick thoughts from, in this slide, Dr. Sheena Jackson, president of Nashville State Community College in Tennessee, and also Dr. Paul Brooks, vice president for student affairs, Oakton Community College. And I would just like to call attention to Dr. Brooks paraphrases a quote uttered by many leaders that never waste a good crisis. And that also was a phrase that resonated with many of those leaders with whom I had a conversation with, that, once they were in crisis mode, they realized, that it is a crisis and it is tragic, but it also presented a very important opportunity that higher ed would be remiss not to act on. EDUCAUSE is another important resource that I relied on time and time again, and that other individuals in higher education read constantly. So in an article for EDUCAUSE Review, it noted that those who have built online programs over the years will attest that effective online learning aims to be a learning community and supports learners not just instructionally, but with co-curricular engagement and other social supports, they argued. Ultimately, effective online education requires an investment in an ecosystem of learner supports, which takes time to identify and build. Once again, we hear the word and we see the word ecosystem. And I bring this up because this is National Distance Learning Week, and the conversation of online education is front and center, particularly since it was our only form of delivery during the pandemic. In speaking with Dr. Susan Aldrich, who's now an executive higher education consultant, but was former president of Drexel University Online, she indicated that the pandemic further accelerated online growth. And this is also a factor mentioned by other leaders that I spoke with. University presidents and provosts are taking advantage of this post-pandemic environment to transform their universities by building digital ecosystems, recognizing that this online space merits recognition as an ecosystem because it overlaps with so many of the other important areas, critical areas of higher ed. Future-oriented universities, says Dr. Aldrich, used higher education emergency relief fund to invest in virtual infrastructure, multi-channel communication systems for students, such as chat, video conference, email, and phone, of course, augmented websites for self-service, extended call center hours, and 24/7 tech support, inclusive of advising by phone and video conferencing. So there were many opportunities that rose out of the ashes of this terrible pandemic that many of us survived. And here we have some quotes from two other leaders, Dr. P. Wesley Lundberg, who is at San Diego, Miramar College. He was formerly at Suffolk County Community College, and President Michael Ziosi of Rowan College at Burlington County. Again, two individuals who appreciate the opportunity to work together, to be flexible, and also recognize the pandemic as an accelerant, and an accelerant that higher ed really needed to pay attention to, but it took this very traumatic point in time for it to be a tipping point for us to be able to move the needle in higher ed in many respects. Other things to consider. On top of the financial, enrollment, and pandemic exacerbated challenges, current and new leadership have been further tested by questions of access and outreach and support for a future prospective non-traditional graduating classes of students. As we know, higher ed counted on support from CARES, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which allotted approximately $14 billion to the Office of Post-Secondary Education as the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, or FERF. The question now is, how will institutions fare several years from now due to the enrollment decline? And we can see how leaders who stepped in during the pandemic, others who stepped in after things began to settle down, and others who have been and continue to stay the course throughout the pandemic have been making changes, really taking a look and drilling down on what can be done differently. What have we learned? What improvements need to be made? What will the new normal be like? And that's a term that some scoff at or think, it doesn't necessarily become a popular term, but it is. We have to think about what will normalcy look like in higher education and in our own personal lives. Other questions also include about people being vaccinated, or processes changing. There are some institutions where it became a mandate. Now, some have relaxed those and they're not requiring vaccinations anymore. Well, what will the conversation look like in the future about vaccination? What are sustained expectations? What lessons from the last 2 years might stick? And what is life going to look like when COVID becomes more flu-like and seasonally manageable? Are we there? Are we there now? Or are we there yet? So ultimately, innovation, as we know, is an iterative and additive process that involves ongoing exploration, examination, and dialogue among thought leaders and other change agents who are open to trial and error. So practice makes perfect, or in the case of leveraging technology in the classroom space, it has improved. In conversation with former president from Camden County College in New Jersey, Dr. Gordon, he said that the college got better at instruction. He mentioned how transitioning students just became although it was challenging, he said it was really a worthwhile experience, and something that they would continue to invest in. Looking at their infrastructure and making sure that there were the supports to be able to provide instruction in an online or hybrid modality. He discussed how it was just the convenience of it all made it something worth looking into and sticking to. And he noted how, as community college students have transportation challenges, childcare challenges, workplace challenges, and the virtual environment was a piece that they had not really taken a look at as they did during the pandemic, and realized how, while online is not necessarily for everyone, but this convenience factor is truly important, and how students recognize that now they could learn from their homes and wherever they are, and it was empowering. So looking at the ecology of higher education, make us recognize that there are important areas for new leadership to attend to and be mindful of. And so onboarding is an area that needs to be continuously looked at. New faces, right? There was a lot of change during the pandemic, and we're still seeing the aftermath of that. There was restructuring, new priorities, right? And also organizational structures. And so these are areas that now have provided, they have kind of bubbled to the top, and they have always been important, but with new leadership at the helm, these are areas that they have to address in order for them to be able to move forward and advance the mission of their college. So again, I had mentioned higher ed as an ecology, and Dr. Don Borden, former president at Camden, also spoke about this issue, recognizing that it's important to have a service thinking mentality in higher ed. Having flexibility would certainly empower leaders and institutions to support students, because they could easily pivot now and in the future. And it was a lesson that they learned so that they could be better prepared to meet students where they are now and forever. He said, so I think that malleability is important. And, for us to change the way that we were taking advantage of these opportunities, it was very important to be able to facilitate how students learn. Just was provided students with less of a burden to worry about, now, but you also have to have the resources when we provide online education, and provide the services so that students understand what is needed in order to be successful in this environment. Having the class alone online and having access to computer isn't it, so you still need to have community to be able to provide support services and to embrace those students that perhaps are not as prepared online because they've never done it before. According to the 2022 Inside Higher Ed Survey of College and University Presidents, most presidents indicated that their institutions implemented beneficial changes during the pandemic. And the presidents agreed that they will keep some of the changes even after the pandemic ends. And they were able to implement some of the positive, long-lasting institutional changes during the pandemic. I spoke with Dr. Gregory Fowler, who's the president at the University of Maryland Global Campus in Washington, D.C., and he noted how higher ed leadership should focus on their mission. And Dr. Fowler added that with the proper technological infrastructure, higher ed can provide proactive educational supports. So in talking with him and others, and also reading what has been happening of late, sticking to the message, to the mission is also very important, because higher ed institutions need to realize and be true to themselves. If you're a for-profit institution, that's what you are. If you're a public institution, that's what you are. If you're serving community college students, that is who you are. And be able to realize what is your reality and how can you learn from the lessons learned and learn from your colleagues and sisters organizations to determine, okay, what are the factors that we are facing with? What is the aftermath that's real to us now? And what are some of the strategies that we can implement that will really be sustainable? You know, not just a one-shot opportunity. Margaret Rankel published last year in the New York Times that friendship is forged across time through good fortune and tragedy alike. And I believe that so is leadership, particularly having had the privilege to have conversations with 22 individuals to discuss this very important issue and this very fluid issue, which is learning, teaching modalities, and how that might be delivered in the future. A recent article in Harvard Business Review echoed similar sentiment, that in a complex and uncertain world that demands constant learning and agility, the most apt and adaptable leaders are those who are aware of their limitations. And that is sticking to your mission, understanding what your limitations are. You can shoot for the stars, but whatever ideas and innovation you'd like to implement, it has to be manageable. You have to have buy-in. You have to have people surrounding that idea that want to make it a reality. Edward Cornish, the former president of the World Future Society, highlights 7 lessons that also can be learned. Prepare for what you will face in the future, anticipate future needs, use core information when necessary, right? If that's all that you have. Expect the unexpected. Think long-term as well as short-term. Dream productively and learn from your predecessors. I thought that that was poignant and I wanted to include that. Also, it's important to understand that actions impact one or part of the system can invariably and inevitably affect other parts of the system. And it's important to know that because higher ed has been famous for working in silence. And what the pandemic did was break down those silence by the need for people to work together, speak to one another, have a better understanding, creating greater affinities and roots, creating a root system. Lorraine Harricone of UT Austin was talking about college libraries and how they might be represented in the future. And she used the term plausible futures, which I respectfully adopt. And she, in talking about library systems, she mentioned, how can the library advance the mission of the college? Embedding it itself in the core mission of the institution. Having a strategic plan or plausible futures are the role of the library in terms of data management, transformative negotiations, etc., and new emerging roles. So in closing, I paraphrase and by saying, convert sinews of resistance into powerful networks that can strengthen and advance education. Imagine how institutions will serve ever-changing demographics, generations of baby boomers, millennials, Generation Z, and the future alpha. It's important to recognize that if we stand still, those around us will not, time will not, trends will not. So it's to our benefit to just stay in the mix, stay informed, continue to have conversations as leadership continues, expands, changes, transitions. Companies are desperate for employees, and they can't maximize their potential unless they have the talent that they need. There's a need on both sides for partnerships that can be fulfilled, but it needs to be managed well and carefully. this is something that Dr. Aldridge mentioned during an RNL Graduate Online Insights interview, and I thought was very very significant to share. Thinking about how, as institutions of learning, it's important for higher ed to be connected to what the business outlook, occupational outlook is in need of, so that we can be talking from the same page, building those bridges so that students coming in will see a path out and a competitive marketplace waiting for them, but they need to be prepared with the skills. It's important to think on a strategic level, launch a think tank of industry experts, enhance or engage in industry advisory panels, advise curricula, and someone dedicated to building those relationships and coordinated efforts. These are just some of the ideas shared by some of our groups. So now at this point, I'd like to pass it on to you, and maybe we can have a conversation. How do you visualize higher ed in the future? And I have a QR code and a link. If you would like to submit your ideas, I would be happy to then share what that might look like with any of our attendees, and add to the discussion about what are our thoughts about higher education and how those might transpire moving in the future. So if you can't participate in the Mentimeter, if you would like to share a lesson learned during this time, I invite you to also email me. And that is my contact information, my LinkedIn account, and my personal website. And I thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to discuss them with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Could I possibly bother you to back it up to the
Mentimeter? Sure.
Yes, please. We'll also put that on the live platform.
Sure.
Thank you.
I ran through the presentation.
No worries, no worries. So to our audience, we'll post the Menti. We'll post the Menti in just a moment, but
Sure.
please chime in, and if you have any thoughts or any questions for Dr. Salas, please chime in.
I can share the screen.
Okay. Thank you so much. Elena Pecora says, thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think this is a conversation that is ongoing. I just had the opportunity to have a snapshot of these leaders representing a variety of higher ed institutions, asking them, how are you coping? What are you doing? What do you think it might look like in the future? I mean, they were tough times, higher education having to reinvent itself. And so it's going to be very interesting in the next few years to see what that looked like and what the role of online education will be. We will all be staying tuned, and I will be continuing to ask questions and learn.
TA Essex says, thank you. This was very informative. Constance Plunga, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Constance says, thank you. So to our audience members, please be kind enough to complete our anonymous survey evaluation before you leave, helping us provide some feedback. And meanwhile, we invite any thoughts, any questions for Dr. Salas. So, Dr. Salas, could I maybe ask you of the experience of working with these leaders? Is there something that sort of comes to the top as most commonly mentioned by all leaders?
I believe that they all at some point spoke about recognizing the mental health of the college community, the importance of knowing, or learning how to deal with this trauma, and which was new to everyone. They all mentioned vulnerability, and I think that's really significant, because what the pandemic did, it created this blurring of the lines between our professional and our personal lives. And we could see it in everything, listening to the radio, on the news, in class, at work. You hear the lawnmower, you hear the snow blower, you hear the garbage truck coming up to, or the delivery, or the doorbell ringing, or you see, you hear babies crying, or people's pets jumping, at the most inopportune moment. And that would have never happened. And so what does that have to do with higher ed? I just think that it made everyone realize that despite our titles and our level of responsibility, that we're all people. And this mutual respect, I believe, resurfaced, not that it didn't exist before, but as people, we are the things that may be affecting us became more public. Perhaps not everybody appreciates that or wants that to happen. People are very, private, but it impacted how we lived, how we work, how we communicate. And so folks in leadership capacity had to learn to navigate that while they were also addressing their own issues. And it just creates a culturally, emotionally sensitive or alert environment, which now I think makes us better, or can make us better, because we realize that, yes, we can, because work continued to get done. People still work, people still taught, payroll still happened, people continue to get paid. We found ways, so I would say that mindfulness, mental health, innovation, agility, versatility, flexibility, those were a lot of terms that came up over and over again. And so rather than talking about things in a negative way, there's always, resistance, or, this group against the other group. It was more about, we recognize our differences, we have to collaborate, we must, in order to make things happen, we have to work on it, so civility, civil discourse, just find solutions, as opposed to problem solving. Let's find solutions. How can we make it happen? And I think that's really important, because it's just a little shift, but a shift that makes a difference. And also being mission driven, student centered, but just being higher ed centered. How do we make this happen? I think the fear that doors were going to shut down, and the higher education as we know it, brick and mortar, vanished. And we did see some of that. For example, in the state of Pennsylvania, there has been some mergers, right? Around the country, there were some institutions that did close their doors, unfortunately. But then there was also, it did inspire innovation. Like how can we keep our doors open? How can we address enrollment issues? How can we retain our students? Because it's less about getting more through the door. It's about how do we keep the ones we have, like in looking at retention rates. Okay, so let's say your retention rate is 80%, which is very good. What do we do about the 20 that we're not retaining? So I just think it was really, I learned so much having these conversations and I'm very thankful that they were open and were able to take the time to speak with me. And I don't know if the pandemic had not happened, if that would have been as easy. I think that because we all got used to using Zoom, like in the past, I don't think I would have thought of sending an invite to a college president saying, do you have a few minutes to talk to me? But because we had Zoom, we were able to do the face-to-face on Zoom as opposed to a conversation over the phone, which wouldn't have had the same impact. They got to see me, I got to see them. Some of them talked to me from their offices, others were driving, others were, so it was formal, but it was informal at the same time. We weren't there to just have a chat. They don't have time for that. They have a college to run, but they appreciated what I was trying to learn and gave me the time of day. And I will be forever grateful for those minutes that we shared.
Melissa Rendon actually was chiming in and saying, what a great point about these blurred lines. And we also have some audience questions. Christine Pruitt is asking, do you hear any differences based on the institutional type that these leaders came from?
That's interesting, right? Because they all face the same challenge. Even those who had the infrastructure face the same challenge. I think that we could probably, I'd have to look at the data to see institutions that did not lose enrollment. For the most part, enrollment did. Institutions across the board suffered. Even with for-profit institutions, there was a dip. And maybe it was nothing of their own doing. I mean, if you were an online institution where enrollment dipped, it wasn't because of anything that the institution was doing. It's people's lives were being impacted. They had to become caregivers, caretakers, or they got sick themselves, or they had to go to work. So in education was not front of mind for them. What I found in common, like, yes, there are different priorities across the board, whether you're a community college or if you're a private institution. I think that they have different priorities, but a priority that they all share, student success. I think, but the fact that they all want to deliver quality instruction, and I thought that, to me, it was just a way to say, we all have different goals, institutional goals. We may have different types of students, or student demographics vary, but during this time, presidents across all institutions, they had affinity groups, they had affinity chats, they talked to each other, learning from each other, understanding that in many cases they may be competing for that same student. But there was, I just thought it was a beautiful thing, the move of engagement, right? The respect, leader to leader, institution to institution, that, everyone has their the priorities and their goals to meet and match, but yet knowing that, as Dr. Fowler indicated, you're a massive institution, you're an ASU, for example, you have, tens of thousands of students, right? So that you don't have the same worry as a small private liberal arts college whose enrollment is really dwindling, So I just feel that while the competition is there, And, there's a term, which is not mine, I have not coined it, cooperation, right? So you have to learn to cooperate, you have to learn to compete, right? And sometimes it's about, we can talk about articulation agreements between 2 and 4 institutions. The goal is to work together to create a pipeline, not to cannibalize each other or steal students from each other. So how do we make it work? We all want the same thing. We all want to survive. We want to keep our doors open. How do we do that? It's not about revealing trade secrets, right? I'm not going to tell you how I do it necessarily, right? Because, we want to, each place wants to be special for students to want to come and be a part of that campus community. But at the same time, there's so much that we can learn together, and having these ongoing chats and looking at our own data and drilling down on the data, like the use of data dashboards. I mean, I think the technology, we're at a really impressive time in the higher education timeline, where there's so much that we can do. Systems are increasingly speaking to one another so that we can learn about retention, not just as a number, but drilling it down to gender, race, equity, socioeconomic, and there's just so many different issues, disciplines. So a student can be doing great across the board, but then you could look at where there's some pain points, whether the student is first generation, whether it's an international student, or, there's just so many different dynamics, whether it's an adult learner or, a student that receives accommodations. And it just could be anything. It could be anything, but the data can tell us a story, and we have to look at it. We have to look at it and speak to the various areas of our institution who are responsible for a piece of that data. I believe the leadership has to communicate so that we all have a better understanding of what that story is, so that we can figure out ways to affect important changes, the necessary changes at our own college. So yeah, so there's lots to learn.
Thank you so much. And TA Essex was saying earlier, it really allowed leaders to assess if they truly had balance within their home and work life. And the balance was completely off when everyone was working from home, with kids doing school and parents doing work.
Yeah. Right. And in some cases, some leaders were in their offices and the rest of the staff was at home, and they had to face that and wonder, how do I do this, and how they were feeling, because they're human beings too. Yes, they're at the helm. And it was just very, very interesting to see the human side of leadership and where they get the strength to continue to lead. They also need a support system. And I think that part of that support system, in addition to it being your own families and, personally, it was the leaders at other institutions, their affinity groups. I think that was very, very helpful. And to have the support of their boards, of course, and the community who stood by them and relied on them to make these decisions. We're back on campus, we're not back on campus. What kind of modalities are we going to have? And moving forward, what is that going to look like? So yeah, it remains to be seen. I'm sure there's more change on the horizon.
And then I believe it was in the context of the pandemic exposing all these dormant issues. And Christine, correct me if I'm wrong. Christine was asking, let me try to scan through this. I lost my for a second. She was saying, what suggestions do you have for those who find ourselves at institutions that are not openly recognizing these issues? And Christine was also saying, it can make us better if leaders are willing to acknowledge, but she's not convinced that they are. So what would you suggest to those at institutions who are kind of not feeling comfortable recognizing these issues openly?
Right. I mean, I believe that prior to the pandemic, it was very easy for leadership or middle management even to ignore some of the issues. Like, and an issue, it's National Distance Learning Week, online education. as an obvious viable option for instruction delivery. Some institutions had an infrastructure and others didn't. Some had an infrastructure, but there was dust on it. You know, they didn't really use it. They didn't really maximize the use of it. But then, you know, necessity breeds creativity and innovation. And those who didn't have it went out and bought one. You know, they bought a learning management system. They had to invest in it because how else are they going to do things? And others who had the system said, oh, I didn't realize I had this. You know, we're actually quite prepared. And I think that you find both extremes, right? Those who didn't have an infrastructure, didn't think they needed one ever, you know, maybe it just wasn't something that they felt they needed. Others had it, didn't maximize it. And others were way ahead, had the infrastructure. So it was an easy shift for them. There will always be naysayers, there will always be resistance, but after what we lived, it's important not to be short-sighted, and we can no longer say that online education isn't an equal to and to instructional delivery. Is it good for everyone? That's a personal decision. You know, a person can try it, and if they're distracted, they have too many obligations and they have no time management, then they'll realize that it might not be for them. But for many who didn't even use technology and then found themselves with this opportunity, they had to learn. It's not easy. You need support systems. You can't just throw up a learning management system, just upload some documents and say, boom, there we have online education. It's not like that. There has to be training, there has to be professional development, there has to be a process for creating and revising courses. There has to be a support system for questions and tech support. You know, but you build these systems. You know, they need to be sustainable so that you can scale up, because otherwise it'll flop like anything else. And so to those, if you're in a situation where you're in an institution that doesn't believe it, well, you know, there's plenty of data out there to support the contrary. And as we saw in the last few years, there was an exodus. And there was an exodus for many reasons. Some were planned retirements, and others were individuals who decided this is not for me. I no longer want to do it, or I don't want to learn something new. I just don't want to do it. And so it opens the door for others who do. Sometimes you can't convince someone. And it's not about convincing. I think it's about that mutual exchange and that conversation and that respect to give an idea an opportunity for it to work. But for someone to flat out say, I'm a non-believer, this is useless, this can't work, no, okay. It's their right to be able to say that. But the real question is, do those people have a seat at the table, and do they want to affect positive change? You know, do they want to address the problems at the institution and what is needed? And if what is needed is, let's say, a learning management system or a process for creating and revising courses, then that's what is needed. But you need others at the table to have that conversation so that you can arrive at the decision that might help, you know, because you do need buy-in. You need buy-in. And all the stakeholders need to be at the table so that voices are heard.
Yeah. I remember the other day, Dr. Jerry Henley was saying that for change management, it takes for us to face our issues before we can even address them or, you know, begin to implement solutions. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, some people and some leaders are visionary and they have foresight, you know, so they don't have to live it to know that it might happen or that they have to be prepared. But now that we all have lived it, you know, why torture ourselves? Let's just be prepared. Let's be prepared. Because if it's not that again, it could be something else. So why not take this time and just learn just learn, maximize, capitalize on what we learned.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Salas. That was
Thank you.
a great presentation and follow-up commentary. So to those leaders who did sort of have the courage to embrace the challenge, to find innovative solutions, to make mistakes, as our keynote speaker was saying, I would like to invite Ms. Wendy Pate, who chairs our awards committee, to tell us a little bit about our awards. Wendy, please. And while Wendy's getting ready and will tell us a little bit about awards, I would also invite you to continue staying tuned. A great continuation to Dr. Salas's presentation at 3 p.m. Eastern today. Dr. Melanie Shaw is going to talk to us about the Chief Online Learning Officer in the post-pandemic world. Wendy, please.
We'll see if I can stay on my internet's really unstable today. USDLW awards, we're finalizing the categories and we will be opening them in the beginning of December, before December 15th is my goal. So real short, so I don't drop again, please keep your eyes on usdla.org. Under awards, there will be nomination information in there, as well as pricings to submit your award. So I encourage you to please keep your eyes on the website for more details to come.
Thank you so much, Wendy. We just posted our website on the EduVision chat, along with a fresh link to the post-survey evaluation. With that, we thank you all for taking the time to join us and to learn from Dr. Salas today. Alex, thank you so much for the great presentation. Everyone have a lovely afternoon, and we'll see you back at 3 p.m. Eastern. Take care. Yay.
Very nice job. See, I just sat there in the background, just listened and monitored, made sure everything was looking good. Saw Wendy drop out a few times. It's all good.
How's
Thank
the
you. It was great.
Yeah, Wendy.
Let's see how we did. Yeah, we'll get statistics afterwards. You had quite a few comments, which was good. So that's good engagement there.
Yeah, we did. And
Great.
hold on.